Okay, hello everyone. To some of you, hello again. To some of you, hello for the first time. My name is Ania Ostrowska and I'm a digital coordinator of Screening Rights, the Midlands International Festival of Social Justice, Film and Debate. This year, we have our 6th edition, and this year, as pretty much everything else, it is all happening online. So if you haven't booked your tickets yet, you can head to our festival website after this event is over. It's www.screeningrights.com and book tickets for 6 fantastic feature documentaries we have selected for you this year. The festival's director, Michelle, is somewhere here probably, but yes, she's here, but because of the technical issues with a very weak internet connection, she will remain just as a name on the screen and you won't see Michelle tonight. One thing there are two technical things I would like to mention. First thing is we have closed captioning available for this event. So if you go to the bottom of your screen, you will see CC closed caption sign. If you need closed captions, please click on it and then you will you can choose to have subtitles running. The other thing I would like to say is this event is recorded. So if you don't want to be recorded, please turn off your camera because especially if you're on the first screen, you will be seen in the recording of the event, which we may later use on our social media. Even though our festival this year is happening online, we are really keen to maintain the link with the region, with the cities in the Midlands, especially Coventry, Warwick, and Birmingham. And we have 3 local sponsors this year. One of our sponsors is Coventry City of Culture UK 2021, who are very kindly hosting this Zoom event tonight for us. And they are also helping with the closed captioning to cover the cost of the closed captioning. We are also, our other sponsor is University of Warwick, and we're also supported by Film Hub Midlands. You have all seen the film Seahorse, either just now or before our discussion today. So I will now pass on to our panel who will be talking about the film and about issues raised in the film. Chair of our panel tonight is Dr. Cath Lambert from Sociology Department of University of Warwick. Cath's research interests include gender and sexuality, as well as the development of critical methods of research, writing, and teaching. And Cath also is a queer parent, so she can contribute to this discussion about queer parenting tonight as well. Okay, so I'm passing on to Cath now. Enjoy the panel.
Thanks very much, Anya. Welcome, everybody. It's a huge privilege to welcome this absolutely fabulous panel. We've got tonight Elliot Evans, Jake Edwards and Freddy McConnell. So Elliot Evans is lecturer in modern languages at the University of Birmingham, where they research 20th and 21st century literature, visual art and theory, particularly the intersections of feminist and queer and transgender theories. Jake Edwards is social media and communications manager for Mermaids UK, so working for the rights of trans and gender variant children. And Freddy McConnell is, of course, the protagonist of Seahorse, which tells the story of his journey to becoming a dad as a trans man. And in a moment, I'm going to invite the 3 of them in turn to speak for about 5 to 10 minutes, thinking from their different perspectives about the role and the potential of Seahorse to shape and intervene in social and political discourses. And I'm then going to give them the opportunity to comment on each other's responses before opening out to any questions from all of you here. We really hope to have some questions and discussion afterwards, questions for the panel. The questions are going to need to be put in the text box. The chat function will be enabled after the panelists have finished presenting, but you might want to be thinking about what you're going to ask while they're talking. And just finally to say, I'm sure I don't need to say it, but I will, that this is an inclusive and pro-trans event. So trans rights are not subject to debate here. And so please ensure that questions and discussion are kind and respectful. So I'm now going to hand over to our panel and beginning with Elliot.
Thank you, Cath. And And thank you so much for having me on the panel this evening. It's really exciting to be part of it. And it was really wonderful to watch the film again, actually. I watched it a while ago, and I was just really struck by watching it a second time with fresh eyes, and really thinking about it in preparation for this panel. So yeah, as Cath said, I work at the University of Birmingham. My background is in modern languages, French in particular, or Francophone studies. But I also run our master's program in sexuality and gender studies. But as I guess a linguist and a kind of someone who works on kind of language and literature, I was really interested and really excited actually by the way that language was approached in the film, and the possibilities that the film has, I think, to kind of, and the work that Freddy's done as well, I should say, to kind of expand kind of gendered terminology. So I'll just kind of give a bit of a kind of backstory. So I had conversations with a lawyer. So a lawyer approached me back in September last year when Freddie had the court case following his application to be registered on his son's birth certificate as a father. And just to kind of give a bit of a kind of background to this, the court declined to kind of to do so, stating that there was a kind of public policy reason why a child should know the person by whom they were physically born, and they decided that the term mother should be considered to be a gender neutral term, and to be capable of describing Freddie's situation, so a man who's given birth. Now the linguist in me kind of is kind of thrilled at the prospect of opening up the term mother, but I know obviously that was a massively disappointing kind of decision for you, Freddie, and one that you're kind of fighting for very good reason, right? Because this lawyer was asking me, you know, as a linguist, my professional opinion on whether or not the term mother was a gender neutral term, and was asking about the etymology of the word mother, which, you know, is very interesting, right? You know, it's part of the Proto-Indo-European language for all the kind of language geeks out there. You know, it in its roots, it does have some very gendered terms. So if you think about the words like maternal, matriarch, matricide, you know, those are heavily gendered. There are other roots, for instance, matrix, which means, broadly speaking, a kind of system from which things are engendered, right, which is less gender specific. But this is all kind of beside the point, right? Like, as a linguist, we're not historians, or sometimes we're historians, but for the most part, we're dealing with language as a kind of dynamic, living force, right, as a political and social force, right? So yes, we can kind of dig out the roots of the word mother, and we can look at etymology and those sorts of things, but that doesn't really answer the question, is the term mother a gender neutral term? I mean, you don't need to be a linguist to answer that, right? Mother is probably the most gendered word in the English language. And I think what is exciting is to kind of shake that. And I think what's really exciting about the film is the potential, and also the work that Freddie's doing, is to expand the term father, right? So I was really struck in the film where there are these scenes of Freddie crossing out pronouns and mother and all this kind of gendered language from, was it kind of documents from the Midwife, I think, this kind of pack that you received, and the role that kind of language plays in the film. And one of the things that I think this film can do, and I really hope that it does do, is to expand that word father, another very gendered term in the English language, to the extent that father doesn't feel kind of incompatible with menstruation, or with you know, ovulation, or having a uterus, or giving birth, or carrying a child. So yeah, those are the kind of you know, hopes, I guess, that I have for the film. you know, this kind of transformative potential of language. And I think it's important to note as well, we're not just talking about legal language, right? Like that's important, it's really important. But it's not the only way that we use language, far from it. Okay, like language is a really powerful force, and there are lots of people that I won't bore you with at the moment, but writers that I work on, Monique Wittig, for instance, who's well, you could say kind of birthed queer theory, right? A French kind of writer who's really interested in the kind of transformative potential of language, particularly like gendered pronouns and things like this. Yeah, should I leave it there, Cath? I don't want to kind of bore anyone with language too much. Yeah.
That was brilliant. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thanks.
Okay, can we hand over to Jake?
Hi. So I will just say hello to everyone. My name is Jake. My pronouns are he or they, and I am non-binary. I'm also a bit of a last minute fill-in today. We were meant to have Louis Asquith, who is amazing, much more intelligent than I am. They are head of legal and policy, but unfortunately they have been caught up for the last 2 days on a Tavistock court case, which I won't go into too much. And we'll move on to something a little bit more positive, which is the work that Mermaids does. Just to explain kind of where I come from. Mermaids is a charity, for those of you who don't know, who offers support to young, trans, non-binary, gender diverse young people up until their 20th birthday. We also offer support to their parents through many things, online support groups, normally in-person support groups, and events and residential weekends as well, but unfortunately not happening at the moment. Kind of to get into my thoughts, wow, I think, I guess where I'll start off is, as somebody that wasn't too long ago within Mermaids' remit, as a non-binary person who was assigned female at birth and, you know, grew up thinking that I was a trans man for quite a long time, seeing this journey on screen for me personally was quite emotional and a bit, it kind of shakes me in a way, because I'd always put the idea of pregnancy and of children way out of my mind at a very early stage of my life. I'd thought it was a very uncomfortable thing for me to think about, because it was something that I'd been conditioned to think is female, and female wasn't what I was. It always kind of very much scared me, this whole idea. But to see a step into the future, which is the ability to embrace parenthood, embrace pregnancy, and embrace having kids regardless of how you're born, how you identify, and how your body behaves, I think for me was amazing. For me, it opens my eyes and makes me feel like maybe I don't have to be uncomfortable with that idea. And I think what that does as well is there is an entire generation of kids that are growing up now, people that we're seeing and supporting through Mermaids, that will see this idea coming up more and more, that you don't have to be defined by the idea that society has for your biology and the way that you should work depending on your gender identity and your gender expression and all of this. So I think you know, I can't imagine what seeing this is doing for kids now, because it's getting them kind of before the point that I'd got to. It's getting them at that earlier age where they can be shaped and formed by the people that they see on screen. So maybe people like me won't grow up with that fear of what they could have in the future, you know, that idea that pregnancy is this big, scary, awful, horrible, feminine female thing, and sort of redefining that. And I think, Elliot, it's interesting what you were talking about in language, kind of looking at these things, you know, father and mother and how they're gendered. And for me, I guess, not being scared of those terms anymore, you know, maybe, I don't know if I'd be comfortable being called a mother or a father, but I think maybe I'm getting to a point in my life where I'm redefining those terms for myself. If somebody wants to put mother on me because I would have given birth to a child, maybe that's something that I can learn to disassociate from the gender and put more to the thing that my body has done. I feel like I'm rambling a bit here, I'm sorry. But I think it's interesting for me from a perspective of sort of working with younger trans kids in my perspective as a non-binary person, and this whole long-term fear of pregnancy I've had my entire life. Really, I think that the most important takeaway for me is knowing that it's these little things are planting seeds in the heads of younger people to know that you have a future, and you don't have to be defined by what society is saying right now, what society has said in the past 10 years or the past century, that things are changing, and you will see people on screen who reflect what you want in life. And I think that's so important for trans people right now. To see anything that is positive is honestly the most important thing, because it's a very negative space for trans people in this country right now. So anything positive, I think is extremely important. I'm going to round off there.
Thanks very much, Jake. And then finally, can I turn over to Freddy?
Thank you, Cath. So, wow, yeah, I haven't talked about Seahorse or thought about it much for quite a long time now. So, and it's always strange knowing that, you know, most of the people watching this have just watched the film, and I actually kind of stopped watching it on about maybe the third or fourth screening I went to, which would have been in early 2019, because I just thought, you know, there's only so many times you can watch yourself give birth on a massive screen. And so that was definitely a healthy decision for me. But now it doesn't even really occur to me to watch it. But now I'm sort of thinking maybe I do need to revisit it, because it just feels like such a long time ago. And so much has changed since then. And obviously I'm now like 2 and more than a half years into being a dad. And so, yeah, thank you everyone for coming and watching it and being here tonight. Thank you for having me. It's interesting that question, you know, this opening question of like the potential of Seahorse to create change. It's interesting hearing two other people say very positive things. I always feel like I can come across as quite negative when I talk about this, perhaps because I look back on who I was in 2015, I guess, like early 2015, when I was thinking about, do I want to share this experience that I'm planning to go through? I am a journalist. I was a journalist then. I was working for The Guardian in Australia, and I sort of, you know, knew what the potential of documentary could be. And, you know, I think it was quite soon after I'd watched the Edward Snowden documentary, which had been a really powerful experience in a small cinema in Sydney. And I just had this feeling of like, wow, maybe if I was to share this experience of going through pregnancy as a trans man, which I only just found out was possible, having been told that testosterone would make me infertile, you know, maybe if I did that, it would create a lot of empathy for the trans community in general, not particularly because it was like a pregnant man story, but just because it would be a really intimate story about a trans life, which is so rare to see. But also that it would let other trans men, non-binary people know that they could do this as well, which at the time, and I think even still now, but certainly at the time, I realized, you know, we were still being not told the truth about our options for starting a family. So those really were my two motivations. And now I am quite, I don't know, what's the word? I suppose pessimistic about how much we achieved the former, given what it feels like to be a trans person in the UK right now. I felt when I was going into the project and trying to find people to work with and finding Jeanie and Charlie, our exec producer, people like that, it was, you know, we'd had that 2014 moment of the Time magazine front cover and the trans tipping point, and we had My Transsexual Summer had come out on Channel 4, and everything was just like quite sweet and positive, and everyone was a bit like, oh, trans people, that's interesting, let's find out about that kind of thing. And we hadn't had this backlash that I think we're now experiencing, and so it felt like the right time to kind of share my story, and also I felt like I could do it in a way that I kind of had quite a lot of control over. But then once we did it and Seahorse started coming out and we went to festivals and that kind of thing, I actually got this sense that it was actually still too soon and actually people weren't ready for like the truth, or, you know, a kind of an honest portrayal. It was kind of too much. I think there was a sense that people who might buy your film were wary. We were sort of having more negativity in the press. There was, you know, the GRA debacle in the UK. I just had this realization that actually, yeah, no, this is probably too soon. So that was kind of which was, you know, difficult, but also a big motivation, I guess, to just keep working in this space and keep taking that as a learning experience. And that's not to take away from the film itself, because I love the film and I think it's beautiful and we did achieve what we wanted to achieve. But I just don't think enough people have seen it in order for it to have perhaps the impact that I naively imagined it might do back in 2015. But I do feel like whenever a trans person watches it, especially a trans guy, you know, I've had countless messages from young trans men or people my age saying how much the film has meant to them and how much of just a sort of almost like instruction manual it's been, because it's the first time they heard any of this information. And that, I think, is a more achievable goal, perhaps. I know that there's a group of gender inclusive midwives working at a trust in Brighton at the moment on some inclusive language guides and forms and that kind of thing, because those don't exist in the NHS yet. They do exist in the HFEA, which is cool. So like there's green forms that you can have which are totally gender neutral, but the NHS just hasn't got its act together on that front, even though it would be quite a small task. So yeah, the community side of things, and things are definitely changing. You have people like Tristan Reese in the US doing a lot of work to raise awareness. And actually, it's kind of weird because the US is really leading the way on this particular topic. Like Rutgers University is a center of excellence about transmasculine fertility, and there's studies coming out from fertility clinics in places like Boston. And it's just kind of odd when you know that, obviously, with what's going on in America right now, people kind of think of it as a place where LGBT rights are really under attack. But in this like strange little side world of trans male fertility, they are the leading light, and we are very much in the dark still, and with people still being told that transition makes you infertile, that you sign a consent form, it signs away, you know, where you're agreeing to that. And then lots of people who, I mean, it's amazing to get messages from people who say, wow, I never realized this was a possibility for me and now I'm considering it, or maybe I will consider it in the future. But it's heartbreaking to speak to a trans person who perhaps thought that they were infertile and had a hysterectomy, and if they'd known the truth, may have done something different. And I think that's a scandal which should be addressed. And where to go after that? I've got lots of thoughts about what Elliot and Jake said. So I don't know, maybe it's how are we doing that? I won't go into that yet, if that's not my turn.
Yeah, hold fire on those, and I'll get the others to comment on your thoughts, and then come back to you, if that's all right. Thanks so much, Freddie. So now all three panelists have said a few words. I'm going to ask Elliot if they want to respond to Jake and Freddie.
Hi, thanks, Cath, and thank you so much, Jake and Freddie, for your thoughts. Jake, it's really fantastic to hear about what you're doing with Mermaids, but also you just spoke like so eloquently and much better than I did about the how powerful language is, right? Like how difficult it is, you know, to, I don't know, I guess to kind of resonate with certain words, certain gendered words, right? And I think you say this in the film, Freddie, like maybe it's hard for other people to understand how visceral gendered terms can feel, or maybe it's not, I don't know, right? Who am I to say? But but yeah, I think Jake, you just described that really fantastically. You know, words stick, right? And I don't think anyone should feel, maybe I wasn't kind of clear on that. I don't think anyone should feel any obligation to kind of take on the weight of expanding these words. But if people are kind of are doing it, then you know, all power to them. But I think it is a kind of exhausting task, I would imagine, Freddie, doing this kind of work. And I wonder if the way, you know, the negativity that you describe is, I mean, you must be kind of exhausted after years of kind of, you know, legal battles and all of this stuff. Yeah, and I think it's interesting what you were saying about this kind of moment in 2014, the trans tipping point, and the kind of hopes that we had at that point, and then this backlash. It is a very different prospect, I think, being a trans person in the UK now than it was in 2014. But I think, I don't know, it feels kind of easy to say this when when I'm not the one kind of carrying the weight of the battles like in the way that you are, Freddie. But I think, and I hope maybe the kind of positive responses that you get from members of the trans community who tell you that, I mean, you've massively changed their lives and kind of opened up these possibilities for them. I hope that is energizing in some way. But yeah, I think, I don't know, what was I going to say? Yeah, this kind of reality of being trans in the UK. I suppose what I was going to say is that progress, as we know, is not linear, right? It's hard won, and it's not this kind of this linear route. So luckily for us, this documentary isn't going to go anywhere, and at some point it's not going to be too soon. And I'm pretty sure of that. I think just to give you a bit of a, I don't know, maybe this is depressing, but just to give you a bit of, well, it's positive in the sense that it's not happening anymore. But I work on France, and I, to a certain extent, work on kind of queer parenting in France. And it was only 4 years ago in France that in order to legally change your gender as a trans person, you would have to go undergo medical sterilisation, and you would have to present your certificates of this procedure to a court, in front of a court. So as a trans person, that was in 2016 in France, right? There were very, which I won't go into now, but there were very strict laws around parental rights in France. So IVF is limited to heterosexual parents, married parents who have proven fertility problems. And the idea is that, I think it's similar reasoning actually to the legal response in your case, Freddie, which is that children deserve to know where they're kind of, how they were born and these sorts of things, as if somehow that's going to kind of ruin a child's life if they are adopted or if they have gay parents or something like that. So things are changing. I mean, the law is changing, but obviously we can lose ground as well. But I think what's harder to change actually is, and sorry to bang on about language again, but you know, once you shift these terms, the law has to move with that, and society kind of has to move with that as well. Yeah, I think I'll leave it there and let others speak.
Thanks, Elliot. Jake?
I will say, Elliot, my friend who is also non-binary is a linguist, so we often have long, weird, rambly conversations about language that end up actually making no sense, which is kind of the funny part. And I think, like, gosh, talking about gendered terms and language, it gets exhausting. And I think I've just finally gotten to that place as a non-binary person where I'm like, I have to stop caring now. Like that, it comes to a point where I'm like, I just have to give up. If people want to use certain terms for me, they can. I know who I am. My friends respect me, my family respect me, so that just kind of has to be enough. But I think, gosh, I just realized what I said then, and it's like I'm compromising, and I think that's a legacy that a lot of trans people have is you learn to compromise. You learn to compromise a lot about your life, your rights, your medical rights. And I think something that you said, Freddie, that really kind of hit me is that a lot of, you know, trans people will go through with hysterectomies because they believe that they won't ever have children. Because, you know, I remember when I was signing those forms of consent, you know, those really long forms, all the side effects of testosterone. And, you know, it gets down to that one. It's like, it can make you infertile. They, you know, it said like can, not definitely will. And they do kind of mention that, but not enough stress is put on that it's not definitely going to happen. I feel like they need to stress, oh, it might happen, as if that's the most important thing. Like, oh, you might be infertile. You need to know that this is what this decision is going to do, as if that's going to stop an extremely dysphoric person from wanting to take testosterone. You know, for a lot of people, that's a life or death decision. But they do not put enough stress on, hey, you could still be infertile. Like, you might want to hold off on any other surgery if you want to have kids, and just, you know, just double check that. I was quite close to considering a hysterectomy quite a few times in my life. Never wanted lower surgery. And after I'd had top surgery, I was like, hey, maybe I'll take one more surgery step and that'll be it for me. Then I found out through some weird circumstances that yes, I am still fertile. And that was after 3.5 years of taking testosterone. And that really, it was a sudden shock, and it really changed a lot of my perspective on my own body and everything I'd been led to believe about my transition up until that point. Why was I considering a hysterectomy? Well, because somebody had told me that taking testosterone would mean that at some point I have to. And it's all these things that you get fed from so many different perspectives about just about fertility and about having kids as a trans man or a non-binary person. And it's kind of exhausting when you find out the truth, because it's like a reality shaker. Like, oh my God, I've been through all of this and I've thought this for so long. I've had so many doctors telling me this, and it turns out, well, actually that's not true. But no, I think it's important to be having these conversations and to be seeing films like this, because, you know, even if younger people are kind of missing the memo and haven't quite seen this yet, there will be other people within the community that are seeing it, and there'll be people on forums talking and saying, hey, actually, you might want to think about not getting a hysterectomy if you want to have kids. You know, that this message that this is putting out, it's not just a direct message, it is a continuing message that will go out and spread throughout the community. You know, because I feel like the trans community can be quite close-knit. You know, chances are every trans person is like 2 degrees of separation away from each other rather than 5, you know. But I think it's similar with information, that information spreads, and it spreads quickly. So having something like this will mean that this information will start to spread throughout the entire community. That's the important thing, is for people to know that this is a possibility, and you don't have to, you know, shut the door on that and pretend you never wanted it and you never want to think about it just because you think it might not be a possibility. Yeah, I'm gonna cut myself off before I ramble.
Thanks so much, Jake. And then finally over to Freddie.
Where to begin? I have stuff I want to say about the court case side of things, the legal side of things, but also, this whole question of fertility and what it means to have a kid, and what it means to have a body, and what it, you know, how my sort of main feeling about it at this point is that, like, the idea that you have your gender, but then you have your sex, and they're 2 different things, actually is not very helpful. And we're never going to kind of really move forward if we maintain that dichotomy, because it just does not allow for the reality of trans people. Even to say that my gender is one thing, but my sex is another thing. I get, that's what I can say. I suppose it just doesn't allow for our lived experiences and how we understand ourselves and how we understand, you know, decisions that we make around things like surgery. You know, I think it's safe to say that the majority of trans men around the world don't have lower surgery. And that can often just be a very personal choice about how you feel about yourself and dysphoria, but it also is often linked to the fact that it's a major surgery that is likely to entail complications. And I think a lot of men just decide that they either can't take the risk, or they can't afford it, or they can't take the time off work, or they haven't got the support around them that they would need to recover, and there's like at least 3 stages of surgery, blah, 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 blah. But because that's a private decision, nobody knows. And so it's not used as a reason to question that person's identity. And I just worry when we talk about things like pregnancy and having kids, and the idea that this act is fundamentally female and that body part is fundamentally female, then it very quickly starts to chip away at the validity of trans people as a whole, because I feel like we've got to the point now where we understand that like having a penis or having a vagina is not what makes you who you are. It doesn't make you a man or a woman. I know that for a lot of people that's still a very challenging idea, but I think it's important that we steer away from falling into biological essentialist ideas about something being defined, for instance, as a mother because of the act of giving birth, not only for trans people, but then where does that leave surrogates? Like, where does it leave adoptive parents? Where does it leave people, any other kinds of mothers and fathers out there who we now understand as mothers and fathers? And actually, through bringing this court case, it's been a real eye-opener in terms of how the British, or I suppose probably technically English and Welsh legal systems basically fail all queer parents at every turn. Like, I had no idea that. So the reason, and it's funny, it is really interesting, Elliot, listening to you talk about language, and like I wanted you to carry on, but I was also thinking, I think you're giving the judge too much credit, and this is with the greatest respect to that judge, but basically his job is to make a decision on the basis of what the law says, and also what the forms say. So because actually the case was divided between the family court and the administrative court, so it is literally just a question of like, can we change the forms? So they're really not considering the semantics or the philosophical points of language, all those kinds of things, and what makes, is mother a gendered term. I think that's not disingenuous, that's probably too harsh, but the reality was that they haven't made mother an ungendered term, because as soon as you delve the next layer into the law, it just starts talking about women, and female this, and so all they're doing there, I think, my interpretation is, well, we never thought trans people could have kids. That was never considered when the 2004 Gender Recognition Act was drawn up. There was this implicit understanding that transition meant full transition, which would get rid of the ability to have children, which was never really considered as to whether that was a violation of human rights at that point. And it was never talked about explicitly because we're British. Like, if you go back in Hansard and look at the parliamentary discussions about it, it's hilarious. They cannot say these words and they just don't want to talk about it. So you're left with this situation where we now realize we haven't dealt with it. There is no provision for trans parents in the law. And so rather than deal with it head on and correct that, they've just decided to subsume trans men into the category of woman, which is a huge problem in terms of the GRA and the Equality Act and all sorts of other legal technical things. But so which is to say that this idea of whether mother is no longer a gendered term, I think it's a very nifty little phrase, but that isn't really what the judgment is saying. And what else? Oh, another thing that I always feel like I just need to say when we're talking about, Jake, that consent form, we probably signed the exact same one. I always kind of hope that it's not the same now, because like, surely we're no longer saying that transition is carries this risk of infertility, because actually, like, there isn't even a might. Like, my issue is that there is no evidence that testosterone in and of itself affects one's fertility. So the burden of evidence should be on researchers and doctors and whoever it is to establish that evidence before even suggesting that it might affect our fertility. Because as soon as you mention it, you make people afraid, and you're kind of, you're feeding into this assumption. I think it fits the narrative of like, well, the transition looks like this, it's linear, it's one size fits all, it will mean you can't have children. The way they talk about it and the way we feel about it kind of turns it into a de facto sterilization, even though the law doesn't require sterilization. There is this kind of, well, we're not going to say it, we're not going to require you to have surgery, but we're going to kind of make you think it, and we're going to just all kind of pretend that that's the reality. There's guys who have come off testosterone after 15 years on these groups on Facebook and go on to have babies. And, there's one small study now that's come out of America that shows that there is no difference in the fertility of trans men, regardless of how long they've been on testosterone, and cis women in a sort of double-blind, peer-reviewed study kind of thing. So, like, if anything, there's evidence to the contrary. So, like, let's just stop talking about this maybe affecting your fertility. I actually had my son when I did, because I thought that there was still a chance that it would affect my fertility in the long run, and now I know that that's not true. And I was lucky; I was in a good position. I was able to start my family when I did, and it didn't cause me problems. But I think actually another problem what we have right now is that you have quite a lot of trans men having kids very young because they feel like they need to do it pre-transition. So often when you're encountering, young, like trans dads, Seahorse dads, we're like 19, 20. It's quite rare to find an older trans dad like me. And that's also because we're not told that it's not a good contraceptive. So there's another reason we need to be told the reality of like what testosterone does, regardless of whether a doctor thinks that, it's ridiculous that trans men are having babies. We should be told that testosterone is not an effective contraceptive, because plenty of these young trans men that go on to become dads didn't plan it. It just happened by accident because they got pregnant while they were on T. It's just bonkers. I just want to shake all the gender identity clinic consultants and say, look, just tell us the truth. Yeah, that's probably enough.
Thanks, Freddie. Thank you so much, all of you. They were really provocative and interesting and engaging personal reflections that I know have given me loads to think about. I'm sure they have the audience as well. I'm going to ask Ania now if we can open the chat function to everybody so that people can pop questions in the chat. If you, I'm happy to field those questions, but if you would like to say your question, we'd love to see you and to hear you say it yourself. So could you just indicate in the chat when you write your question whether or not you're happy to be asked and to speak, and obviously then you'll have to unmute and speak. And so while that's happening and the chat's being opened, I'm going to take chair's privilege and ask a question or an observation that hopefully will turn into a question. I was thinking while all of you were talking about the importance of emotions, and I started thinking about it when you were talking, Elliot, about like I don't think you used the word emotion, but thinking about our attachment to words like mother and father and those sorts of terms and what they connote and how they make us feel. And then that kind of carried through into Jake's quite personal reflections on a sort of emotional response to the film and how it makes you think, both for yourself but for other young trans guys, about a kind of whole different set of possibilities. And then Freddie dealt quite explicitly with the sort of, I think you used the phrase heartbreak of kind of responses from trans men to the film that can sometimes be really hopeful, because again they've opened up this different way of thinking about their own possibilities, but also can be about missed possibilities, what could have been, and realizing what could have been and never will be for them individually. And I think we kind of all can acknowledge that this is an emotional context and an emotional film in lots of ways, but I think we're probably not always so good at perhaps articulating what is the political and the social work that emotion does. And I wondered if you could think about that in relation to Seahorse in particular. Was that, Freddie, for you, was that wanting it to be an emotional thing, to make an emotional shift? How important is it that this does something emotionally in order to enact some sort of political change?
Yeah, I think I feel like a stuck record because I will just bang on about empathy forever and thinking that is basically what's missing, and that if, like, I work with an organization called All About Trans that does interactions with often journalists, but also just like other organizations that want to learn more about trans people and how to maybe take better care of their staff, or maybe like deal with an incident that's happened or something. And it's all just about, it's not traditional media training. It's just about having conversations and getting to know each other. And it works so well. And I feel like if there were enough trans people, there aren't enough of us to like go and sort of have a cup of tea and a biscuit with every person in the UK that's a bit confused or freaked out by what they read in the Times on Sunday. But if there was, you know, like we just wouldn't, it would all be fine. I think like Roger Ebert's got this famous quote about cinema being a machine for empathy. And that was absolutely my my goal as a journalist. You know, obviously I'm in the film and it's my story, but I do tend to think about it with my journalist head on. And so I made the decision very early on that I couldn't even begin the project without making peace with giving birth on camera, because like, you know, then the end of the film would be missing, and like that's the beat that you need to end it. So I sort of thinking about it from quite a removed position, but thinking about the emotion from a removed position, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Do either Elliot or Jake want to respond to that, or should we move on to audience questions?
I just think, just thinking about the perspective of people watching it, and especially trans people, I think it's so important for other people to know that trans people are having an emotional response to this and are feeling something, whether that's positivity, hope, whether it's sadness or loss, whatever that is, that we're having a genuine, real human moment of emotion. And I think that's something that kind of gets lost in the conversation that is being had about trans people, is that they don't view us, or they don't represent us as having a full spectrum of human emotion. They view us as either being completely hysterically overtaken by dysphoria, or angrily banging on the doors of the gender clinics and the courts to try and get things changed to work completely in our favor. And they're not viewing us as being complex humans that just want to live lives and you know, emote and exist. And I think just having a moment to sit down and watch something like this, letting people know that, yeah, we're sat here and we're having the same emotional reaction that anybody else will have, except it's kind of more amplified because it's about us, you know, it's about our experiences. So I think that's just where the emotive point for me really sticks.
Thanks, Jake.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just to reiterate, like empathy is so key. I mean, there's research to show that you know, TV shows, for instance, with trans non-binary characters, it can shift people's perception of the rights that trans people should have, like in it, you know, in this quite material way, right? Like it changes things when people can empathize with people who are marginalized. So yeah, really, really powerful.
Thank you. Okay, so we've got some questions coming in. Caroline, would you like to ask your question? Remember to unmute yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Cath. Freddie, hi, I had a question for you. I hope that's okay. I'm a student midwife. I'm going into my third year, and I just sort of wanted to ask you, what did you want and need from your midwife when you were pregnant? I know you had trouble with the forms, but on a more sort of relationship and emotional level, what did you need?
Sure. So I had a community midwife. Like down here we have community midwives, so that for me was quite a different experience to then the midwives who were there in the midwifery led unit, because my community midwife wasn't there. And what my community midwife did was, she was just incredible. Like she didn't have any special training or anything, but she's just very cool. She's very, I mean, like my town is quite unusual. It's quite mixed, and there's kind of like quite a large population of older gay people. So I kind of knew that if I had a midwife who was from Deal, that like she'd probably be cool. And I actually kind of knew who she was through other people who had known her. So being able to, I wouldn't say like pick, but like having a small team of people locally who you can kind of feel like, that you could maybe get to know them properly. But I mean, on a practical level, she came to my house, so I didn't have to ever go to an appointment at GP surgery. She just offered that in a really kind of chilled way. She didn't make out that she was like doing many special favors or anything. She then also would like lay the groundwork. She'd kind of go ahead of me if there was like when it was time to go for a scan. She made sure that the sonographer was cool. Like I wasn't privy to any of this. She just did it without really kind of telling me or stressing me out about it. But she would always make sure that the person I was going to encounter was going to be respectful and understood the situation, which was amazing. My sonographer was actually queer and a Star Wars fan, so she like top marks. And how important that was really laid bare when I went to one growth scan later on, where that system kind of fell apart because it was like last minute and various reasons people just kind of weren't in touch with each other. And I just turned up without any warning to the labour ward at Margate Hospital and had a horrific encounter with a nurse who was very disrespectful in a very public setting. And it was like unprofessional on various levels, but particularly in my situation, it was crushing. And so yeah, just like taking some extra care, but not necessarily having extra training. And then I think in the MLU, when I was giving birth, the midwives seemed to really pay attention to my birth plan. And yeah, they just like nothing particularly special. I always struggle at this point because, I think maybe I just got lucky, or maybe I just got good people like who took care of me as an individual. But then I think everyone should have that when they give birth. And I know that's like the NHS's kind of approach now. I think there's some initiative that's called like Better Birth. And it's all about treating the person as an individual, and treating me as an individual doesn't take that much more because they just used my name and I never got misgendered. I think if anything, I have this weird feeling that like they really respected my wishes, and that was some kind of like weird male privilege because I had like this deep voice, and I don't know, like I just had such a great experience. So yeah, just sort of being really caring and paying attention to what the individual needs is really all it takes, I think.
Thank you very much.
I've got another couple of questions that the questioners have asked for me to read out, and actually the first one kind of really flows on from that. In fact, you may have addressed it, Freddie. The queer doula Kimbo has said that a friend and I have set up the queer parenting partnership with the view to providing queer parents with queer specific antenatal and postnatal education. What was the most important aspect of pregnancy care for you?
I mean, what I felt I lacked, because I suppose I've said what was really good in my experience, what I felt I lacked was any kind of collective experience. So I felt like I needed to avoid NCT because I just didn't know whether that would be welcoming. Also, there wasn't a particularly close one where I live. But I just couldn't find any groups to go to that were for queer parents. I lived in Deal at that point, but I even looked in London and could find basically nothing. I was told that I would be very welcome to go to a yoga session at Clinicu, which I would have been really up for, but it was just like a long way to go for a yoga class. And it wasn't pregnancy, it was just, sort of gentle yoga for all sorts of, people who would attend Clinicu. So that was really shocking. Whenever I Googled it, it would always be like, queer pregnancy yoga in Toronto, or come and meet other queer pregnant people in Vancouver. So yes, that kind of collective experience. And even when I did find someone who is now a good friend and actually was also pregnant at the same time, who was doing pregnancy yoga in my hometown, she didn't explicitly make clear that her space was queer inclusive, because she'd like never thought to do that, which is totally fine. Like, she's a great person, but you know, as most people probably just never thought to do that, neither had she. So I ended up having a private class with her, but like knowing that I would have much preferred to go to a group, really, if as long as I'd known it was safe, because you know, you make friends and you bond and it's kind of a memorable experience. So I just felt in my positive experience, I was still very isolated.
Thank you. And there's a question from Tanya saying thank you to Freddie and everyone. And Tanya says, the capacity of documentary to function as a machine for empathy is something that fascinates me a lot. The rapport that you and Jeanie have comes across in the film, even though we don't see Jeanie. Can you please speak to the experience of having Jeanie film for you over the 3 years and the relationship you formed and how that was key to the documentary?
So I guess like my original motivation for having someone make the film other than me was that I felt like I didn't have the experience and it would just be too much to take on. So I needed a very trusted sort of, you know, we always talked about it as a collaboration, even though she directed it and her name is on the film, and that's totally fair enough. You know, it was very much a collaboration, but actually I didn't want too much. I sort of, when I met Jeanie, I told her what I wanted to do and she sort of explained it back to me better than I'd said it to her in the first place. And I sort of thought, okay, you're the kind of person I think who I can trust. She's an artist first and foremost, went to art school. And I got the sense that she had a very clear creative sort of practice and quite quickly a very strong creative vision for what she saw the film being. And she wasn't looking to me for that at all. So I could just kind of step back and let her do her thing, which freed me up to just like have sort of successive breakdowns and meltdowns about the experience I was going through, which I kind of needed to do, you know. And I think where she struggled was me not wanting to be as open as she wanted me to be. And there was definitely tension there sometimes, but like whenever I doubted what I was doing, which I did at various points, not because of Jeanie, but just because of how intense the whole pregnancy was, I sort of thought, well, do I still have my original motivation? You know, is that still true about wanting to build empathy and spread awareness? And yes, it was. And do I still feel like Jeanie is this sort of creative powerhouse who's going to do a good job no matter what? Yes, I do. Okay, well, let's continue then. And yeah, that was very reassuring. And I also sort of had this sense that I needed maybe someone to be a bit of a translator for my experience, and that person maybe needed to be cis. And I'm not sure how I feel about that now. I don't think that's actually necessary. I think I was probably just kind of I don't know. Yeah, I've just changed how I feel about that particular thing. But in terms of whether it would have just been too overwhelming for me to make the film. But yeah, we didn't know each other. It took a long time to build that trust. And actually, all the way to the end, I knew that I had the freedom to say, this stops now, or like, we're not filming the birth. Or even if she was in the room, I just had to say, you need to leave. And she would have left straight away. That was in my birthing plan, which she never questioned or had issues. So like the freedom to shut it down was what made me feel like comfortable doing it in a weird way.
Thank you. That's really interesting. Thank you.
Thanks. Are there any final questions for our panelists? Okay, I don't think there are. In which case, I mean, I'm sure we could go on talking about it all night, but it's tired time, isn't it?
Can I just say one last thing?
Yeah, of course, Freddie.
In case the conversation we were having before about the legal stuff and, you know, and something you said earlier about being exhausted, I do just want to say that I'm not exhausted. And actually, I don't find the process exhausting. I have this brilliant legal team who, I'm sure they wouldn't mind me saying, do not just the hard work, like they do all the work. So I just feel like I'm extremely privileged to be there watching them work. And the same is true with my son's legal team. And I am like, it's annoying having to wait for like decisions like the Supreme Court not giving us a decision about whether we can take the case there yet and that kind of thing. But we are all still very fired up. And yeah, and just the very last thing, this idea, right, that like kids born to queer parents deserve to know where they come from, and that is somehow equivalent to having a nuclear family where the person that gave birth to you is your mother and the person that contributed the sperm is your father. I just find that so problematic. And it's like, no one is trying to hide anything from anyone apart from, and if you don't let language evolve in line with how families are evolving, then it's the people who are holding that progress back that are hiding the truth, that, you know, that are obfuscating and confusing the situation, and especially confusing the children who know exactly who they are and where they come from. So yeah.
I mean, that seems to me to be the kind of ultimate queer note, doesn't it? When actually, you know, you're not trying to fix it into an existing set of patterns or set of language or existing binary, but actually all family making is hugely complex and messy. And actually kind of being more transparent about that mess and complexity is quite queer, no matter who, you know, the parents are or what their gender is. Absolutely. There's a few comments have just been coming in saying thank you for the film and the work from Adam. Thank you, Freddie, for sharing your story. Devon says, as a trans masculine person, it's great to see such positive trans representation. Jake, thanks for everything you do. Been following you on Twitter for a while. The work you do with Mermaids is really inspiring. And Tanya says, I plan to teach Seahorse on my documentary course for many years to come, which of course is, you know, how the film will get out there, and lots of people, including young people, will be seeing it. Lots of thanks. Beautiful film, learnt so much. Thank you so much to all three of you, to Freddie and Jake and Elliot. That's been really brilliant. And thanks to all of you that have asked questions or listened and been there and watched the film tonight. Don't forget to check out, if you haven't done already, the Screening Rights Festival, 22nd to the 25th of October. There's lots of amazing stuff there, including lots more panels and discussions. And thank you all. Stay safe, everybody. Take care.
And I just
hand over to Ania.
As a very last thing, thank you so much for coming, and we will send you tomorrow the feedback forms. And I hope, as you all understand, for a small festival like ours, it's very important to get feedback about how you enjoyed the event. So if you could spend 5 minutes tomorrow answering some questions, we'll really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Ania. Thank you, everybody. Good night. Take care.